Good morning, everybody. So, today morning's topic, let me read it again. Are we going to shoot anymore? I think there's a certain mysticism about visual effects, and sometimes it's understood as magic, that it is magic, but the misunderstanding is you press a button and it's done. Well, it's not. And one of the things that we're talking about today is about virtual production, which is what is, are we going to shoot the films, or are we going to be able to create all of it on the computer? So let me start by just introducing myself. My name is Merzin Tavaria. I'm the Chief Creative Director and co-founder of Prime Focus. We are a visual effects and 3D conversion company. We've been in the business for now almost 20 years. We're going to be next year. Started off as post-production for TV series, then commercials, advertising, and then visual effects, DI. And today we are in almost 16 locations spread across the world. Working on, we've just been working on Gravity. We deliver Gravity and a couple of other projects that are going on right now, which obviously we can't talk about. So it's been an interesting journey in the Indian cinema to just see how visual effects has been evolving over a period of time. From the time that the biggest and the most complex job was wire removal, and 50 shots of wire removal were a big challenge, right up to when a dabang happens or when a Jai Ho happens, you're dealing with maybe 1,000 or 1,600 shots, and every time they break new barriers in terms of numbers. But visual effects and is getting more serious, where it's not just about numbers, but about quality and about using visual effects in a much stronger way. And that's something that we are sort of trying to pioneer also in India and push that cause forward, using our various international offices for bringing in knowledge, as well as doing some of their international work and putting India on the global map. So we have our esteemed panel today, and I'd like each of them to introduce themselves. So why don't you start, Heiko?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the chance to speak to this audience. My name is Heiko Sparenberg. I'm from Germany, and I work for Europe's largest research entity, which is called Fraunhofer Institute. The Fraunhofer Institute is headquartered in Munich, and we have more than 22,000 employees working in so many different fields of research, including solar technology, biotechnology, and of course, multimedia technology. We have more than 60 institutes spread all over Germany, and each of this institute works independently. Of course, we have some offices in Boston, United States, in Los Angeles. We have offices in Moscow, and of course, in Bangalore, in India. We are a non-profit organization that tries to fill the gap between the university and the industry, because many years ago, Fraunhofer was founded in 1949. They figured out that the results from the universities is nothing we can use in the industry, so they need something to fill up the gap and takes latest research results and generates new research results and put it into prototypes so the industry can adapt those technologies and bring it into real products. So the Fraunhofer Institute tries to close the gap and to have better outcome. Most of the times we develop prototypes. We are happy to make those prototypes lighter and faster and whatever if a company comes to us and asks us for contract research. And as a non-profit organization, we get partly 20% of our income from the government, and the other 80% are part or through contact researchers. We are worldwide known. We developed some groundbreaking technologies. One example is the MP3 codec that was not developed by a company called Apple in the United States. No, the MP3 codec was developed by Fraunhofer a couple of years ago. It's still our most famous development. We also are active in camera development. For example, we developed the D21 for the camera vendor called ARRI, which is also located in Munich. We also developed something which is called the DCI test plan for the big Hollywood studios. It defines more than 1,000 tests a certain hardware for digital cinema has to pass before it gets the label that it's DCI or digital cinema certified. We also contribute a lot to the standardization. So we are active in the standardization process of digital cinema. We were involved in this digital cinema standardization, built a lot of software tools, and are working on new camera technologies. I'm not an expert of the Indian market, so I won't be the best person to talk about these topics, but I bet I have a lot of experts here in my group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Stuart Haskane. I'm from a UK-based motion capture company called Centroid. I'm here in India in partnership with a company called Pixelcraft from Chennai. We're basically just trying to introduce motion capture technology to India, the Indian markets, Indian film. Predominantly, what we do is all based in digital characters, digital environments, and digital cameras. So motion capture essentially entails just taking an actor or a performer, putting them in a specialized suit, taking them to a specialist studio, and essentially just recording their motion. This tends to get used in things like games and films, television, advertising. Essentially has, because it's a very adaptable kind of medium, it's got a lot of applications. Basically, we also, to try and replicate the conventions of traditional acting as closely as possible, motion capture also embraces something called full performance capture. So on top of traditional motion capture, which is just recording the body movement, the actor will also wear a helmet with a head-mounted camera. Basically just a bar that comes out here in front of the face and just records the facial performance in exact timing with the body performance. From this, you can then derive a digital character that's as much as possible a perfect recreation of the actor that you were capturing. A good example is about a year and a half ago, we worked for a while on Kochdian, and the entire production came over to the UK, shot with us for a couple of weeks, I think it was, at Pinewood Studios. Again, full performance motion capture. So not necessarily the conventions of traditional filmmaking as you might understand them, but basically recreating the performances that you're used to seeing, but digitally. I think that's about everything as far as I can introduce myself, so I'll just hand over.
Thanks, Stuart. Myself, Naresh Jingyani. I look after the international post-production for VFX, 2D to 3D conversion, restoration, and digitization and content processing for Reliance. We have a studio out here in Airoli, 30 minutes from here. And overall, Reliance does all the kind of post-productions, right from sound stages to DI and all the works which Merzin just mentioned. And really a pleasure to be here and speak about the future.
So, just wanted to again touch upon what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about virtual production or the future. The topic that we're talking about is how do you, first of all, which are the movies that best exhibit or best explain something like this? The first one and the most obvious one that would come to mind. Anyone? Okay, so that's one word. So just for our knowledge, that's one of the biggest ones, and that's what really made sort of a mark in this in history, But that's not the only one. There are many other films that have been made similar to that. Tintin is another example. It is not exactly in the complete realistic space, but it's a little bit stylized and still is in that. One of the earlier films that actually brought more of really photoreal humans into acting was something like Benjamin Button. How many guys saw Benjamin Button? So again, Benjamin Button was a unique challenge because it was the first of its kind that came so close to making it so perfectly human. Then it was followed up by Tron. Tron also had a fair amount of shots of Jeff Bridges. a Younger and a Jeff Bridges, which was made possible by using this technology. So historically, or the transition of everything going from, let's say, analog into the digital world, it started off with just the theaters first started, embracing more digital technology for projections. A lot of you might not know, but the film projectors that we are also used to seeing as big, spools of film that were getting loaded, and every 20 minutes there was a reel change. All that ended a few years back when everything started going digital. So that was the first introduction of digital into even India. From there on today, like Heike was mentioning about ARRI, has been one of the early adopters of going digital, where the cameras now today are shooting everything digital. Film is slowly, or rather actually has gone almost. We are so used to shooting everything on our mobile phones. We are all sort of making our own little small movies every time we are shooting on our mobile phones. So that's that side of digital. But once it gets into the virtual world, things start getting a little more, different, where we're actually making films inside the computer. So let's start by just getting a little bit more. I think Stuart can give us a little bit more in-depth about motion capture. So just to give you a little idea of the whole process, and then I'll hand it over to Stuart. When you're making a film like, let's say, an Avatar or a Tintin, or one of the films that we worked on was, yesterday's session I had all shown Total Recall, where you have human characters. When the human characters need to be put into scenes, into a virtual world, they first are something that needs to be modeled, then we are texturing them. We are putting in a skeleton inside it, which actually has its own, if you want to have a final movement of the hand, it needs to put in a complete skeleton inside, which is called rigging, where you are putting in restrictors to be able to, how does the hand bend? You can't bend the hand further than that. All that has to be pre-programmed in. There's a lot of technology that goes into it. And traditional animation has always utilized that, but traditional animation, or rather 3D traditional animation, where you do keyframe animation, where each part is animated over a number of frames so that you have one position, second position, third position, and then automatically the thing does. The computer calculates all the in-between frames. But how do you do that, and how do you get another person driving a computer to actually replicate a real live-action human? That's a very tough thing. How do you get that kind of a facial action when manually? That's not really possible. The best person to actually drive that is when you have something like a motion capture system, which actually is shooting a person, and that data, using years of experience and technology, that data gets then translated to the 3D CG character, which is what Stuart will be able to tell us. Why don't you use that mic?
Yes, that's basically to follow on. Motion capture is essentially probably the easiest to use and the most cost-effective way of recreating human movement. As you mentioned, it's incredibly difficult by hand using traditional animation techniques to replicate human movement. And in a discussion we were all having just before the session began, we were talking about how the audience now is so much more aware and so much more able to analyze films these days, digital characters in particular, and to be able to see whether or not they are convincing. There was a film, I think in early 2000, called Final Fantasy. And I think at the time it was the first fully CG feature-length film. And at the time there was also a lot of speculation as to, will this be the future? Will now digital characters and fully digital productions, all computer-generated, will that just replace filmmaking as we know it? Will suddenly there be no need to pay Tom Cruise $15 million for the next Mission Impossible film because all these characters will exist in a computer? And based on the reviews that kind of followed the film, the bottom line tended to be no. I think that, you know, an audience looked at this film with all the experience they have of, you know, films and performances and storytelling, and I think just for one reason or another, it just didn't seem to, at that point, the technology probably wasn't in place to be able to convincingly tell the story and to interest the audience sufficiently. But now technology kind of has evolved, as it always does, and is always pushing forward and just, you know, new boundaries. And with the motion capture in place, I say it's the fastest and most accurate way of recording human movement and then accurately replicating it in specific shots, maybe in entire features. And also now with the addition of being able to simultaneously capture the facial performance as well, suddenly the entire package that comes together is, you know, essentially a living, breathing character that hopefully is then convincing to audiences. You know, another point that you touched on was something like Avatar. You know, if there's a point in Avatar when you're watching it where basically you're not feeling like you're watching some kind of CG feature, that suddenly the world and the characters in that world just are so convincing and so well portrayed that you just don't think of them as being computer generated. You're just now watching a film and you're just enjoying it, and the characters are kind of helping tell the story and there's emotions attached to them. Then that kind of means that the evolution is actually starting to move forward, that maybe some elements of either traditional filmmaking or traditional storytelling can now be taken across to these new mediums and can be kind of presented in a way that would convince an audience and also appeal to an audience. And I think, you know, motion capture is just a step on that kind of road. There's many kind of other elements to kind of come together, but as far as starting to be able to replace traditional elements of filmmaking with digital elements of filmmaking, I think motion capture is one of those processes that's going to be important.
Any other particular films besides the ones you mentioned which come to mind, which actually set the trend before Avatar? Because everyone knows Avatar. Any other movies that come to mind?
I mean, Tintin that you gave was a very good example. One of the ones that was interesting was, again, I think there's been some cases of high-profile successes and some cases of high-profile less than successes. And I think, you know, one of the cases that we were discussing was Beowulf, which was an amazing film, but I think at the end of the day, you'd probably have to ask yourself the question why a film like Beowulf was actually done full CG, just because I think there weren't necessarily elements in that story that lent themselves to a full CG production. But then you look at something like Avatar, where there's basically this entire world, ecosystem, and these characters that just couldn't exist in any other way other than to be computer generated. And then that seems to lend itself to, you know, using this technology in that kind of way and getting the most from it, as opposed to, you know, possibly trying to tell what would be a traditional kind of story that wouldn't necessarily be the best use of the technology. There's always going to be kind of examples, you know, features that either are reliant on CG or completely based on CG. And I think, from my own personal perspective, I'd just say that it's the stories that will be the first thing that will kind of draw people in and just kind of make them appreciate these features. And well, I'm starting to fall to pieces now, so I'm going to have to pass back to you.
Sure. So, Naresh, from your experience of the Indian sort of, you know, space, from a client perspective, the ones that you know, I'm sure everyone wants to make Avatar. How many over here want to make Avatar? You know, everyone wants to make an Avatar kind of film. But so what has been your experience of how much awareness of this process is actually there?
I think to a large extent it is growing, but yet the maturity levels further need to go much higher. I think in the whole, the supply chain of making a film, I think visual effects has to be the first and last out. Any kind of creation, computer-generated creation or imagery that you want to create has to be the first and last out, and then only you will be able to mesh the storyline and the visual effects or the imagery that you want to create very well with the story. I mean, a clear-cut example which I was thinking when Stuart was talking was of this Indian feature called Iga or Makhi, if you all have seen it. The character was a mosquito. I mean, who can ever think of a mosquito being the main character? but the storyline was so well established with real characters supporting it extremely well. I mean, it was a huge success. I mean, if the storyline was not a powerful one, be rest assured that would have been a total flop. But I mean, the whole space of visual effects or 3D or CGI has to be crafted in very well with the overall storyline of the feature, and that's why I say it has to be visual effects guys, the supervisors, etc., have to be involved with the film right from day one. I mean, we're all very eagerly awaiting the release of Coach Dian, but and that will be a real test of time to see whether the Indian audiences connect well with a CGI creature, or they would like to see a Rajnikant shoot live and stuff like that. So it all depends on our innovativeness of creating CG characters using tools and applications and technology like Stuart mentioned, and therefore kind of integrating that with the story.
So just again coming back to further defining virtual production is what really goes into it is the process of filmmaking is similar. Now the whole process has just come into the computer. So you start off with storyboarding. You need to storyboard the film. You need to have concept art for the film where it's inspiring or it's inspiration for the rest of the team to actually understand what's in the director's vision. What is the land you're making? Is it going to be a futuristic? Is it going to be completely in a jungle, or is it in like a more of a urban location? All that needs to be defined, or rather at least conceptualized, because that's all coming out of someone's mind. It may be based on reality or it may not be based on reality. Then you get into previs, and that's a very crucial stage for something like this kind of virtual production or filmmaking, where you have to be able to define your cameras, camera movement, up to a degree that you can, with rough animation in place, because that's going to be the driving force for the shoot. So, before, just not to burst the bubble, are we going to shoot anymore? Yes, we are going to shoot, but it's going to be a different type of shoot. If you are shooting in a sequence like Tintin, which is going all over the world, you don't necessarily need to have your entire crew going into 5 different locations, but you will be doing it in an AC environment, on a location like a studio that Stuart has in London, where there are cameras that are actually capturing that. To be able to drive that, that's where you need a previs in place, so that the rest of the pipeline following that process knows what it's going to be like. While the motion capture is one thing that we touched upon, one important factor in very photoreal sort of filmmaking, and even for games, is the actual character. You're going to make something look like a human, or if it is something like even an animated character or a slightly realistic camera in games. How many of you know about Xbox games? Have you seen Xbox games? So those characters are realistic but are not real. Games have realistic characters in them. They are based on humans. That needs to be scanned. So we do need to scan those individuals, because to replicate that from scratch by just actually manually doing it, it's not possible. It'll take you forever. We do that from images and from photographs, but in something like this, where you're trying to make it as real, like for example, again, Benjamin Button, I do use that as a loose reference, and it's a very risky reference. Please don't try it at home. It's one of the most difficult things. It took that company 8 years to get to that with a few $1 million. So later on, I know the question will come up about cost, and we will ask our panelists also on the cost, but that's an extreme end, and that's not a benchmark or a reference, because it was one of the first of its kind. But anyway, so to do that, there is a very high resolution scan that is required for creating the actual 3D object, so it's a 3D scan, along with the textures of the skin. The skin textures, the details or the finer details, all those are very high resolution textures that need to be captured. There are various levels of detail, obviously, depending on what is the final product. Are you making a game, or are you making a cinematic for a game? Or then are you doing something like Benjamin Button? Then that's the highest level. So those are, you don't need to use that high level detail for a game. The game engine will not be able to process that kind of information in any way. So that's one of the key stages and has to be mentioned in the filmmaking process, because without that, you don't have your actor. So even in the virtual world, there is an actor. Once you go through that process, you get into parallelly, simultaneously, you can get into the motion capture and facial capture area, where if you've seen certain clippings of a certain making of some movies, you will see where you have a character in a suit with some marks all over the body, and that's the motion capture suit that is required so that the cameras can capture that information. Post that, we get into the actual filmmaking process in the computer, and that is where we've done some things like that. In visual effects, we do that, where it is using our 3D softwares, we're putting in our cameras. The camera data is coming from the camera data that is driving the previs, and the motion capture, the animation information is coming from the motion capture stage. Once you get into the filmmaking process in the computer, you need to have all the departments which are still available outside for regular filmmaking. So you have to design the clothes. You have to settle down on the look of the characters, which is in some ways the makeup. You do have to have a DOP on someone needs to play that role. So all those filmmaking departments are all now on the VFX or on the animation pipeline side, which is why it's called virtual production. So from just the technology, what do you think, where do you think is the technology? Are we there yet from an international perspective? From Stuart, you can start that.
That's right. Yeah. As far as the technology goes, I don't think so, because there's always going to be a new avenue that filmmakers would want to explore. From our point of view, because we're a service-based company, the jobs that we deal with are brought to us by clients who would want to do something, so want to do some form of motion capture. Some, as you mentioned, for game clients, for example, will want to do something that's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Some other productions that we've worked on would want to kind of push the boundaries and just explore what motion capture can do. So almost coming away from traditional concepts of just recording human movement. For example, we did a 6 months installation on a Martin Scorsese film called Hugo, and that was using motion capture-based principles to basically allow the VFX supervisor to build up an animatic, so essentially kind of like a computer-generated storyboard of complicated effect sequences in the film, take them to the DOP, take them to the director, get approval, and on the basis of that approval, then have the shot made. So it's not traditionally what you'd understand as motion capture, but still, myself, I was the operator working with the VFX supervisor, helping to generate these shots. So it's not initially what we would have in mind as the kind of first use for the kind of services that we provide, but suddenly a client comes to us and this is a service that they require, and how best can we give them that service? And that is a good example of then how this can then expand out. So not just necessarily the nature of capture getting better, maybe the size of the area that you can capture performances in getting larger, the fact that you can now capture animals and all kinds of things, go out on location and shoot in the middle of nowhere. There's always going to be, I think, those kind of evolutions in what the technology can achieve. But I think there's also going to be just the kind of clients that we're dealing with actually pushing this technology, spearheading it in the directions that they are going to need it for their features.
So, yeah, I would like Heiko actually to say something from the technology point.
Yeah, I just want to add something because your question was, are we already there? And I think Oh, I was thinking of the advantages of the CG animated movie making, and I understand that it's very expensive. And for example, with Avatar, they took in mind that they want to produce a second part of that movie to get the revenue for doing it all.
And third, I think.
And third, I think. So it was very expensive. And what's the advantage of all these things? Is it just because we can do it? No. I think one of the big advantages is we can reuse the content we made. So we make it for the first movie, and then we already have it for the second movie, and we can make a second storyline and hopefully have a very good story with the second and third part, and then we can bring it into the cinema. So I think that the reusability of such content is very important. If somebody starts to make a model of a place in the world, he should be able to give it to another company or or use it for another project just to reuse the content he made, and that's the big advantage. And that will save money for future productions. And speaking from a technical or from a research point of view, I believe that we need interfaces and specifications how to save this for on a worldwide agreed standard, so that somebody can read this model in maybe 5 years' time from now and reuse it in his project. I believe that we, for example, put music on a CD because it had a clear advantage. We were able to jump to a certain position on that CD, and we didn't have to use cassettes anymore. And I believe that this is a big advantage. So, yeah, I want to add that we need interfaces.
Yeah. Just to add to that, there is the models that are made, or rather some of the, like I touched upon, the scans. So internationally, what has been done is a lot of the big stars have actually been scanned already, and they are available with certain vendors, so that that's like your digital avatar for perpetuity. You know, some of our Indian clients that we worked on have also requested to be, scanned, because a lot of times what we'll end up doing that although we are talking about this going a full 100% into the virtual space, the fact is in some steps, some key areas, we've already started going. So there are sequences sometimes which are action sequences where there is too much danger involved, or there are some stunts which are really not possible with star. And that's where we resort to one of the ways of approaching that sequence is actually making what we call a digi-double, where we are actually creating a digital character of that, the main star, and using that in a crash sequence or in a stunt where they are getting tossed around. One of the biggest examples of that would be like a Spider-Man or any of the superhero movies. They are all virtual characters. Well, not all, but in a lot of their actions, they are virtual characters. And motion capture and performance capture. So there are three words in that. There is motion capture, there is facial capture, and there is performance capture. These three are similar but not same. All those techniques are already used. So futuristic point is that it can all go digital. So Naresh, from point of view of technology, or has Reliance dabbled in any of this earlier?
Oh yes, certainly. I mean, one such technology that we keep which has really taken us to the next orbit is our restoration capabilities, for which we won the Academy Awards in 2012, and we've done a lot of R&D on that, and that itself is a very strong validation of our conviction to make things happen in this industry. And currently, we are we are in fact in production to convert from standard definition to high definition and beyond. Lucasfilm's Star Wars and stuff like that, it's currently ongoing. Coming back to what we were talking about in terms of technology, I think technology is evolving and is going to enhance the content creation process. It cannot be a replacement of shooting in its entirety. There has to be, and probably there will be a mutual coexistence. Because as a producer, at the end of the day, if you're making a movie, I'm sure you would want an emotional connect with the audience. I mean, just thinking, or giving it a wild thinking, if I was looking at Chennai Express, and I'm talking about the whole ecosystem as such, including advertising, we saw brilliant shots of a tag her watch in Chennai Express in Shah Rukh's hand, and every time it was the phone, I think it was the Samsung phone, and he put a price to it. It was beautiful advertising. Now imagine a CG character doing that. Will that make the same impact to the audience as as a real Shah Rukh Khan or a CG of Shah Rukh Khan? We don't know. It's still a question mark. But in my opinion, technology and the overall real life shooting experience will mutually coexist even in the future.
So, what do you, Aiko, if you can contribute towards from an audience perspective? Have you heard anything about this? Well, what is the audience take on that? Is the audience ready for something like that?
Yes, I think so. But it has to feel like a real movie. So they are fine watching, let's say, Ice Age movies when they know that's animated movies. And they are ready to look something like Avatar 1, 2, 3, as long as it looks realistic. But they will notice it very fast if there's something wrong in the production process. So they feel kind of it looks more like a computer game, and then they are a little bit disappointed.
So one of the main things about the challenges over here are that as soon as the character is not human, if it is stylized, and one of the, as much as Avatar is taken off as a very good reference, the fact is that Avatar characters are not real. They are creatures. They are actually an extension of some ways. The good part about it is the smoothness and the realistic movements of the characters. But in reality, the facial expressions and all are realistic, but they're not human. So the human mind is not trying to equate that. The challenge comes when it is a Benjamin Button or a Tron, when you are expecting to see a human, and that's what Naresh touched upon, was if you're talking about a Salman Khan or a Shah Rukh Khan, then every one of us knows what they look like. And that's the challenge of making that look as real, talk and perform like him. I think that technology is there, is available, but it may not be viable today, but it's definitely coming up in the next not so distant future. It is there. There are a couple of projects that we are actually discussing globally, whether it's India or internationally, which are actually where sort of that question is coming up, where is it possible? And I think that's one of the key factors of when we say, is that possible? That's what gets the mind going. That's what gets companies like Heiko's company to start R&D and pushing that envelope. And I think that's really definitely coming up. So Naresh, from an Indian perspective of the audiences, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Well, I think if I again take reference to maybe the top grossers of, let's say, 2012, I think 13 of them were so-called CG or animated features. And how much of that was, is the Indian subcontinent kind of geared up to take animated CG features, show after show, month after month, or, I mean the overall spread of the billions of people, the population that we have is so wide that it is going to become very, very difficult for us if we are only going to be focusing on not shooting and just focusing on CG movies. So it is going to be difficult because people want variety. People love to see. I myself was as a youngster always wanted to get into the film business and into the acting space. And when I kind of explored that with my dad at that point in time, and mom especially, man, it was a clear-cut no. But 25 years down the line, when I told my dad I'm getting into this business, he says, "Go son, enjoy." So it is changing. I mean, the whole ecosystem, the whole social network of India is changing, and much the impact is, of course, coming in from the Western world. And I mean, I will tell you very clearly, when I was doing a small survey with my daughter's friends a couple of weeks back, and I said, let's go and watch, let's say, one of these, Smurfs 3 or whatever, and it was a clear-cut no. I said, what do you want to watch? I want to watch How I Met Your Mother, or one of those, the real TV serials that come in, and they don't want to watch an animated or a CG movie. So I think it also depends on the overall, who the audiences are, what are you making the audiences for in the movies, and if I say they are, like I said before, that 13 of these movies were animated movies. Each country, by specifics, will have their own demography, will have their own pull factor for a feature. Avatar, of course, was global, and I think to be able to attract the Indian subcontinent, the audiences from the Indian subcontinent, I think we have to have a lot of variety in our hands and in our minds at this point in time.
Yeah, and I just have a little difference of opinion out there on the animated films because, I was watching Frozen with my children, and I think that's like a full family entertainer. And one of the key things about a Disney or a Pixar is the one key thing that I think what Naresh is trying to touch upon is emotions, is that performance. And I think this content is king. There's no shortcut to that. But being able to actually exhibit emotions and have that performance, that's what sets apart a Pixar or a Disney from some of the other, let's say, players, because they are able to strike that chord through the characters. And so just to, again, touch upon this, that as much as animated films are also part of the virtual production, right now what we're talking about is whether we shoot in the future is more related to a more realistic environment, more options to not having to really go on certain locations, or let's say, for example, we have filmmaking, a lot of filmmakers here would like to think that how can you afford to make a 100-day shoot of a big budget film where you have, let's say, almost 30 days requirement of a big star. Now, as soon as that 30-day requirement comes in, suddenly the cost just is prohibitive. But what if you could not have to go to 5 locations, and what if you could actually shoot within a studio and use the star only, let's say, for 10 days instead of 30 and 40 days? That is what starts making a financial difference and starts making a project starting to get viable in a different way. Because there, then you are still getting like a star or a big actor to be a part of the production, or multiple stars, and yet being able to monetize it in a different way. What Heiko touched upon is once you're creating that content or creating certain assets, a lot of that starts living within the clients or the studio's libraries, where you are then able to repurpose some of that and be able to monetize it over a period of time. So that's a very interesting thing that needs to be done. Stuart, from some of the projects that you've done, and from do you know of any other filmmakers who are using certain assets or reusing some of them?
Not necessarily. I'm just trying to think now of some of the jobs that we do. Say, for example, a specific film. Shots, as I'm sure you're aware, would be kind of farmed out to multiple vendors. So then you'll have different post-production houses sharing those assets. Sure. But also, the point that you touched on is, exactly accurate. So, say, for example, if you create an avatar world, how beneficial is it that you can just revisit that world whenever you want to? It's not going to be like a physical set that you're going to make for a film, in that you strike the film production, the set gets demolished, and then suddenly, if years down the line you decide you want to make part 2 or part 3, it's all got to be rebuilt. Those assets exist in the computer, and they can always just be brought back out again.
Plus technology that you have developed, R&D that you've done over a period of time. Let's say from the rigs that were used for the motion capture on earlier on in production, they get repurposed again and built upon. So you have already done that, some of that research, and you've built it up to a level on the next film, whether it is the same thing. Like, for example, let's put in a Spider-Man kind of a character. Spider-Man 1, the actions of the character are in a certain way. In Spider-Man 2, we are able to do much more because by then the technology has moved on. We're able to repurpose some of that and build on some part of that previous know-how, plus the R&D and technology that's built up within. There's a lot of programming and a lot of software development that goes hand in hand with that. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, from our point of view, but also from the point of view of clients that we deal with, people build up libraries of stock characters, libraries of motions, and these are the kind of things that can be reused. I mean, some movements for hero characters, for example, are going to be unique to certain sequences, but there's nothing to say that if you were doing a feature that had a large crowd, that you couldn't just capture a huge volume of movement, walks, runs, all kinds of idling movements, and just basically just keep reusing that on a production by production basis, just to populate sequences. There'll always be, I think, say, sequences where something specific needs to be done, but to actually be able to have those assets available to you and to be able to be reused, even if it's just to block out a sequence, or even necessarily for a final sequence, it's just invaluable, and it saves so much time and money.
Also, have you come across a project where it's a combination of live action and a game, where some part of the characters are getting reused in some games? Have you actually had that dual thing?
Not a great deal, to be honest with you. I mean, we tend to find the game productions that we work on are, as you kind of touched on, just fully computer-generated kind of projects. Still, going for realism and still, in many ways, adopting some of the elements and conventions of filmmaking to make these productions more realistic and make them more convincing to an audience, but there's still always going to be that disparity that it doesn't actually have the same kind of high-quality output that you're used to producing.
But then there is that whole thing from just VFX Studio's point of view that if it is planned in advance, you can actually repurpose some of those assets into another way. And again, that's another way of monetizing the content. And Naresh, from any of the Indian filmmakers have approached you for being able to use some things, or because I know that a lot of Indian films have games that are developed.
Yeah, actually, we do kind of, I mean, that's, as you rightly said, it's a part of the monetizing process. And if there is a similar kind of shot that needs to be repurposed again, then obviously you will take out those particular stocks from your library. You got to ensure that it doesn't look the same, and build it or texture it accordingly, and then repurpose it and
it
use
needs
it.
to be
Yes,
repurposed.
yes.
True. So, can we have some questions so that we can be a little more direct in your? Yes. Yeah. Can we have the mic?
Yesterday you were saying that we're talking something more about stereoscopy also this time. So.
Well, can we talk separately on that? This is not stereoscopy, so we have very short time, so we'll suddenly be told, okay, pack up. Yes.
Hello. This question is especially for Mr. Sparenberg. I know that from whatever I heard, that it will be a producer's dream to get rid of actors and the tantrums. But still there is a borderline between real characters and virtual characters. So that's likely to disappear. That's likely to disappear sometime in future. So how close are we to achieve that?
So I believe that it's a better question for Stuart, isn't it? So he is doing all these things every day, and we don't have the chain within our facility doing the whole virtual FX. We are just more working on core components. So if you don't mind, I would like to hand this over.
I think your point from a tantrums perspective, etc., might go away. But if I was an actor, I would certainly take a share of the booty from you, and it won't impact your cost for sure. So
yeah, tantrums are not going. Not going. They'll be replaced by other people, but tantrums stay. It's a fun of filmmaking.
Hello.
Robert, do you want to add anything to that?
I think as far as realism and kind of where it can go next, I mean, the easiest question to ask is what you've actually seen so far from what's been produced. Did you find it convincing? Did you find it realistic? And I suppose if the answer is no, you didn't, then the technology's still got a way to go to actually reach that kind of pinnacle. But in a point that you touched on, you've got amazing technology in Avatar, but you've also got non-human characters. Sure. So it's a very good way to use technology to bring realism to these characters, to bring them to life, but also you're still not having to do that huge evolutionary leap where essentially you are recreating a person, putting it in front of an audience and trying to make them convinced by it. Will I feel an emotional attachment to this character? Will the storyline move me in the same way as if it was, just an actor that I'm familiar with and it's just them live? So really, I think it's just, when the audience then starts to accept these kind of characters and accepts the kind of scenarios that they're performing in, then I think that's when the technology has actually kind of got to the point where it's achieved what it needs to do and then needs to look about where it's going to go from there. But until that point, I'd say that there's still going to be a few things that need to be done.
Yes.
So we talked about the cost optimization that results out of replacing the actual actors or with digital ones. Where does the licensing fee, and I mean, like if I'm using a Shah Rukh Khan in the movie, then he has to provide a license. Where does the cost effectiveness actually like?
It all belongs to me. No. So, are we going to shoot anymore? Not today. Where is it going to be? How is it going to be? We don't know that yet. It's something that will evolve, and there will be some, some things in that. But coming back to the point is, it's not only about tangible sort of gain, it's also about intangible gain. It's about freeing up the mind. Gravity. How do you make a film like Gravity if you were going to shoot the whole thing? You're not going to get that. That is one of the ways of showing you virtual filmmaking where, yes, it's being shot, but how much of the film was really shot? There's a lot of virtual stuff in that where even the characters and a lot of the sequences are not real. So that's the thing of, it's freeing up the mind. It's a different way of filmmaking. It's not about just replacing everything. So it's like saying when you're shooting a live action sequence, like, yesterday I was discussing about, let's say, a Total Recall or a White House Down or any of the projects that we worked on. It's not that we now don't need to shoot any sets. You still need a set, but now it frees you up of not confining yourself to, let's say, a 40 by 60 set. You can build only maybe 20 of that, and the rest of the time when the camera is going all over the place, the rest of it can be converted. If you were a filmmaker who wants to shoot in a location in, let's say, for 2 days in Rome and another 5 days in Mauritius, if you need to travel to all these places with the star, with the whole unit, there might be a cost attached to it. You might not have the time for it. There are many factors that actually promote that. If you were able to actually do it within the confines of the studio, then that's a whole different way of doing it. Sometimes we've dealt with productions which have night scenes. So there are nights which are, you're shooting across maybe 40 nights. That with the whole crew, director, cameraman, everyone is not at its peak at night. What if you could shoot it on a set or in a virtual set inside a studio and do the rest of it on the computer? That frees you up in such a big way, and that's the part that really matters. Yes.
You know, I've seen Face Off a long time back. It's Nicolas Cage and John Travolta. So it's kind of a body in a body. Today, if you're doing it, kind of, would you require CG and VFX to actually do that kind of, you know, make it more realistic at the same time VFX?
Yeah, but Face Off is a good example of smart filmmaking. They didn't use any of this technology. It was just the names or just the way it was shot. So that's not really the best example.
Good afternoon, everyone. Especially, see, in Hindi feature films, mostly integration of technology in the filmmaking process happens after the film has already been shot. And due to that, I am sure there are certain challenges that companies like Prime Focus and Reliance Media Works face. And also, see, like it was talked about, VFX need to be involved right from the first step, even before we start with the production processes. So, and also storyboarding needs to be done, which both the things are not really a part of the culture in Hindi feature films. So
You should not say it with so much conviction. It is slightly true, but it's changing. It's changing in a big way. Yeah. We are very much involved at the pre-stage. Sometimes we are involved a little too much in advance, which is a good thing as long as there's a financial backing to it. But yes, but there are a lot of filmmakers who appreciate now today. I have a lot of scripts lying with me, which films are not going into production for even the next 6 months. So there are filmmakers and then there are filmmakers. But to answer your question, things are changing. Visual effects needs to be involved. And if you're talking about anything like this, then it is the filmmaking process. So it's not about before or after. It's right through and through. In fact, here is when we have to remind the filmmakers that you guys need to be involved right through and through, rather than just say, okay, we've had situations where the production has thought that, okay, everything is Prime Focus is going to do it. So, but no, we still are going to do costume design. I still need to know what the costume is going to be like. I can't, I would like to start designing it, but I'm not the best at it. I do need a costume designer. I do need to know that when your hero character is going to get shot or get bashed up, what is his face looking like? How much dirt does he have? How much does he not have? But those are decisions that need to be made by the filmmaking team. And that may be in the virtual world, or that may be in the real world, or they may be VFX savvy or not. That's not relevant. But definitely those departments need to exist right through the film.
And to the point that we were making earlier on previs, it's happening in this industry here now. Yeah. So things are taking a very, very different shape, a very, very different evolution, especially if you're working with creative directors like, be it Sanjay Leela Bhansalis and those who want to get involved at every stage of their filmmaking process. It does make a lot of difference.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Hi. First of all, thank you so much for all the panelists for sharing your knowledge. So my question is, the topic says we are almost replacing the reality, 50 to 60%. Then why we are not able to come up with the VFX IPs, like companies like Pixar, DreamWorks, Blue Sky? We can't find a VFX company who's producing contents like that.
That's a question more related to content and not the technology part of it. It's not about whether, finally the story is what matters. Why is India, animation studios not doing it? That's not true. There are certain studios in the past have done it, but let's say the stories have not been strong enough. So the minute that happens, the technology is all there. Now it comes back to the filmmaking process, which needs to supply that content, and we are very much open to futuristically do something like that.
The content from India has always mostly been inside in. And if you want to hit the global market, you've got to have an outside-in perspective. I mean, otherwise it's never going to work.
I'm not talking about only the Indian companies. Even globally also, there is no, except ILM, I don't think any other companies come up with IPs.
No, but again, correction over there. ILM as the studio and ILM as a filmmaker are two different entities. They are not the same. There's a film producing arm, and then there's the studio. So that'll happen. Watch this space. Okay, I think I've been told to wrap up, so let's wrap it up. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.